Not a day goes by that I don't have a question, and most days I don't get an answer.
Why would I want them telling me all the things that I'm doing wrong?
I don't see how stories from 1,000 years ago can relate to my life today.
Christians say that they're loving until it's someone that's not like them.
I just don't think I need
Who
church.
needs church?
I just don't think I need church anymore.
Those are a lot of tough questions and a lot of honest questions, and from where I sit, a lot of fair questions, really. And that's what this series is really getting at. Who needs church anymore? It's what we're looking at. We started last week. We're going for another couple of weeks. So if you didn't catch last week, go check it out online. Hopefully you'll come back for the next two. But for today, let me start off this way. I was at a Barnes & Noble a couple years ago, I think it was, and I came across a book. And this is the book. This is the title. It said, "The Worst Case Scenario Survival Handbook." And so I lean in. That sounds intriguing to me. How to escape from quicksand, wrestle an alligator, break down a door, land a plane. I want to know. I want to know those things. So I pick up the book and I open it up. And I got to be honest, I was just a little surprised at how brief the answers were to these incredible situations, right? For instance, how to escape a mountain lion attack, all right? There's only 2 steps. 1, do not run, which I'm imagining is pretty difficult in the circumstance, right? And number 2, try and appear as big as you possibly can. And it goes on to share that if you have a coat, open the coat. So apparently mountain lions are out there going, whoa, humans grow wings, and that's very scary, and we're not going to attack them. The other thing it says is if you have a child, pick up the child so that you can appear big, which I'm imagining that's going to keep me from running faster if I pick up the child. But anyway, but you hold the child, and I guess mountain lions don't like 2-headed humans or something because that freaks them out anyway. But I'm just like, that's not enough for me. 2 steps? I'll give you another example. It said, how to survive jumping out of an airplane when your parachute does not open. Which, if you ask me, I'd say step number 1 is don't jump out the plane, okay? Don't do that. But here's the thing. I can explain to you in 5 steps, and number 3 says it all. Number 3 step is locate a body of water and head toward it. That's not enough for me, okay? I am not a big fan of, is simple explanations to very difficult situations. Now, apparently, I'm in the minority because after the book that I shared with you came out, this version came out, the complete worst case scenario guide. So now you can deal with alligators. And then if that wasn't enough, this one came out, the ultimate worst case scenario survival guide for all the times that you're gonna run into a pack of elephants, okay? So you can go check out those books. But here's my point. I am just not a huge fan of overly simplistic answers to very difficult circumstances or situations. And when I think about who needs church anymore, I think to myself that probably church people could be dinged for this one. The idea that we sometimes will come at very difficult situations and just kind of throw in an easy explanation as if, that's going to encourage you, that's going to be what you need, and, that's it. Let me tell you what I'm talking about. I'm talking about when we were getting ready to open this building, or not open the building, but start on the building, and the shovels are about ready to hit the dirt. And the bank calls me up and says, basically, psych, we're not going to participate with this. And it was like the whole project was doomed. Like I thought, this is not going to happen. It's not like banks are lining up to, offer churches money, okay? And so I thought, this thing is done. And I had a staff person that came up and said, well, just remember, God's got a plan. Now, in that moment, I know they're well-intentioned. I know that they meant well. But I want to punch you in the throat, okay? Like, that is not what I need in that situation. My mother passed away, and at the funeral, I had, like my old church, like my home church growing up. So here come all my Sunday school teachers and all these people, and they shared with me what I'm going to share with you. The verse, okay? I think this is the verse from whence, whence, anyway. I was trying to impress you. But anyway, from whence the phrase God's got a plan comes from. And that is this verse. Look at this verse real quick. It is, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him and who have been called according to his purpose. How many of you have heard this sort of verse before, or God's got a plan before? Yeah. And so here's just a pro tip. When you're at a funeral, this is a funeral pro tip, okay? Don't come to the funeral. When you go to the funeral, just don't say this thing. Just hug the person, tell them, I'm sorry for your loss, and then just go eat potato salad. That is all you have to do, because when you come with these verses and you come with this explanation, I gotta be honest, it just comes across like an overly simplistic answer or explanation to a very difficult or complicated situation. Yet, Paul wrote it in the Bible. Like the Holy Spirit of God directed the Apostle Paul to write those words into the Bible. In all things, we know that God is working all things together for good, for the good of those that love him. And so I want to understand it. I want to know, how do I apply it? How do I actually get, if it's meant to give me comfort, how do I get comfort from that? Maybe it's that the Apostle Paul just doesn't understand what it's like for the rest of us. Like maybe he was just a child of privilege. His life is just unicorns and rainbows. It's just a piece of cake. And he doesn't understand the suffering and the pain that we go through. Well, but if you read the rest of the story, like that's not it. In 1 Corinthians 11, it says this. It says, Paul's talking and he says, I've been in prison frequently. I've been flogged severely. I've been stoned, faced death again and again. 5 times I received 40 lashes minus 1, an old form of punishment and torture. 3 times I've been beaten with rods. 3 times I've been shipwrecked. When's the last time you were shipwrecked, right? I mean, he's going through it. He says, I've been cold and naked and hungry and thirsty. And besides everything else, I face daily the pressure of my concern for all the churches. So Paul understands the pressure of leadership among all these other physical things that are going on in his life. So I don't think that Paul writes that verse because he just doesn't understand what it's like in the real world. Maybe Paul writes it because he's just overly optimistic. Like he's just a really sunny disposition. He's just a positive person. How many of you know, the people that are really optimistic, they've never had a bad day, they're usually morning people. Am I right? They're usually, if you catch them on a Monday morning, you're just like, oh, here we go, right? Because they get up like, good morning, Lord. Listen, I get up and say, good Lord, it's morning. All right? So when you morning people show up in my life, it's just very difficult sometimes. Maybe that's it. Now here's the thing. I believe in the power of positive thinking. I really do. I think that you bring a lifted spirit, a great attitude to your life in all your situations and relationships. And I believe that over time, it can lift the trajectory of your life. We're going to do a series on attitude coming up. I think it might be even the next series that we're doing, and how attitude can affect your life. So I believe in that, and maybe that's what Paul is getting at. I believe in the power of positive thinking. In fact, John Ortberg is a great teacher out west, and he gives us a little trick for how to be more positive. You guys want to be more positive? Okay. He says, just remember these 4 words. It could be worse. He says, when you go to your homes, today, and you walk in, you're like, oh, the carpet's bad, and, it's not a big enough house, and it's not, but you're not going to say that. You're just going to say, it could, you're doing it with me. Come on. It could be worse, right? And you just feel better. You're going to go out to your car today, and you're going to pass cars that are newer than yours and shinier than yours, and you'll be like, oh, why do I have to get in this old clunker? But you're not going to say that. You're going to say, it could be worse. And tomorrow morning when you're getting ready for work and you step out of the shower and you look over and you see a reflection of your naked body in the mirror, you could say gravity is a son of a gun, but you're not going to. You're going to say it could be worse. You're not as enthusiastic that time. I didn't know, are you still with me or not? But anyway, here's the thing about positive thinking though. It doesn't necessarily pay the bill at the end of the month, if you know what I'm saying. It doesn't necessarily, when someone comes up and says, hey, I just don't think that I love you anymore and I'm moving out, like, yeah, you should bring positive thinking to that. I just don't know that it completely solves it. When the doctor says you have, this long, I just don't know that, you should try and bring positive thinking to that. I just don't think that completely solves it in the situation. I don't imagine that that's what Paul was talking about. I think he had something more profound, something more powerful. So what did he mean when he said, in all things, God's working all things together for the good of those that love him? It could be that Paul's definition of good is different than your and mine's definition of good. It could be that God and I, or God and you, we're on a different page when it comes to what's good or not. Now, I'll tell you what I think of when I think of good. This is my definition of good, okay? I was on a plane recently, and I was in an aisle seat in an exit row. Come on, some of you frequent flyers, that is a big deal, okay? That is, for a pastor, that's first class, okay? We're never gonna get up there behind the curtain, but this is amazing. So I'm sitting down, I'm super excited, and you're watching the people come on the plane, and here comes Mr. and Mrs. down the row. And Mr. is doing the thing, they're both doing the thing really, where they got their boarding pass out, and they're going, and then they count. Have you seen this? You know what I'm talking about. They're like, figuring out which row they're in. And then, okay, so he sees the seat. He's in the row behind the exit row, behind me, and he's in a seat. And so he goes past, pulls the thing down, luggage goes up. He begins to sit down. Well, Mrs., I spot her. She's coming down the aisle, and she's like right next to me. And she realizes she's in a different row than her husband, and her look said it all. She's like, then she looks at her husband. And then looks at me. And I never wanted to be an atheist so bad in my life. Because, I've always got that thing where, God is watching you, I know he's up in heaven, tapping his foot, pretty much with the same look that the woman has. David, what are you going to do? So I put my headphones on really fast and just focused on, no, I didn't do that. I did the right thing, okay? I wouldn't tell the story if I didn't. Anyway, so I looked at the guy, said, would you like to trade seats? Which now I'm like the knight in shining armor of the plane. Everybody's like, oh, wow, what a great guy. And I get up and I start to move the bag. She's excited, he's excited. So I get ready to take his seat. Starting to sit down next to him. And there is a college girl next to me in the new seat out of the exit row. And she's got her iPad out. She's getting ready to watch a movie. And I kid you not, as soon as I hit sit down, I get a tap on my shoulder from the college girl's friend behind me in the row. And she says, would you mind? Now, she's already seen me do it. I've already lost the promised land up here. And so what do I have to lose? So I'm like, sure, no problem. She's like, oh, thank you so much. And so I get up and I move around. And I'm like, I don't have anything to lose, except for when I turn around, the other college girl is sitting, I realize she's sitting next to two small children. This is plain purgatory, okay? This is not, you never, ever want this, but I'm stuck now. I'm already standing up, people are watching, and so I'm like, okay, so I sit down next to thing one and thing two, and they do what they do. They start talking and fidget and all this kind of stuff. And about the time that I'm wondering, where is mom and dad? Where's mom in this? Somebody from behind taps me on the shoulder. I cannot make this up, okay? Mom taps me on the shoulder and says, would you mind switching with me? And I get up and I turn around, and mom is sitting completely with no one next to her. And I sit down in those seats, and I put up the armrest, and I stretch out on those 3 seats, and I think to myself, in all things, God works together for the good of those who love him, right? Like that. And that is what I mean when I say good. Like, I want, good to me is comfort. Are you with me on this? Good is more money. Good is more comfort, more fame, more whatever. Like, I want it easy. I want the promotion. I want the, I want all of that. That's what I think of when I think of good. And you do too. You think the nicer car, the newer house, the nicer vacation, the more money, the more comfort, the health. That's what we mean when we say good. But here's the thing. I've been watching. And in the Bible, God's definition of good seems to be a little bit broader. It seems to have a little more perspective, a little more depth on what good is. I'll give you an example. Joseph in the Bible. Joseph in Genesis, go read this story. I think it starts in like Genesis 24, right around there. Joseph in the Bible gets sold by his family, by his brothers, into slavery in Egypt. That's a bad thing. And while he's in slavery, he gets accused falsely of a crime that he did not commit, which it puts him in prison, which is a bad thing. But in prison, he meets someone who, through a course of circumstances, ends up where this guy, Joseph, ends up working his way into being the second most powerful person in Egypt. Meanwhile, there's a famine that hits for all the people of Israel, all God's chosen people. They can't eat, they can't drink, they don't have enough. And so they go to the only country, the most powerful country in the world, that still has food and water. They go to Egypt, and guess who is now in the position to be able to grant them food and water and literally save the lives of thousands of God's people? It's Joseph. And there's literally the verse where Joseph says this: what my brothers intended for evil, God intended for good. And there you see God's definition of good and how it's just a little deeper. It's just a little more profound. It's just a little wider perspective. And as soon as we begin to focus on that, we start to remember things in our own life, which at the time we would have said that was a bad thing. But now that we look back on it, it feels like a good thing. There was a job that we didn't get, and then we find out 2 years later that another company bought them out and they eliminated the position that you would have had. And you go, I thought it was a bad thing, but God knew what he was doing. You want to understand this concept? Go back to your old high school reunion and go look at your old boyfriend or girlfriend. That you look at him and be like, oh, thank you, Lord. Thank you, Lord. You knew, I did not know, but you knew. And you thought it was bad in the moment, but now you realize it was a good deal, right? God does these things. Some of you still have, you have moments in your past where you would go, honestly, that was bad. I wouldn't choose to go through it again. But here's the thing. It made me stronger. It made me more mature. It grew my faith. In fact, some of you might even say, it made me who I am today. And there's this concept that what was bad or seemed bad, God would really, and now we would maybe even participate in saying that was a good thing. And it all gets wrapped up in a nice little bow, and all of our questions are answered, and it all makes sense, and we go, thank you, God, for good. And now we can apply that verse. In all things, God's working together for the good of those that love him. And we can just take that and run with it, except for the fact that there are still bad things in your past and in mine that ain't nobody put a bow on yet. Things that still don't make sense. Things where we've asked the why question to God and we have not gotten a satisfactory answer. We have not gotten an answer that says, okay, now we understand. We just got past the 17th anniversary of 9/11. Explain that. School shootings, cancer. Explain to me how we take those situations and some of the things, honestly, in your own life that you would look back and you would go, God, I just don't get it. What were you thinking? If I were running the universe, I would do it differently than you're doing it, God. And I just have a hard time looking at this verse. In all things, God's working together for the good of those that love him. What about that thing? So how do I explain the verse? How do I understand the verse? And if Paul were here today, I got to be honest, I would ask him, you want to explain to me Romans 8:28? Because honestly, when church people have said it to me, it comes off a little trite. And I think if Paul was here today, he would say to you and to me that you need to keep reading. Just keep reading. Because the key to understanding verse 28 is really in verse 30 and the surrounding verses. Look what Paul said. He said, for those that God foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the likeness of his Son. He's trying to take those who are Christians and make them more like Jesus. And those he predestined, he also called. And those he called, he also justified. Now, justified is language that when Paul uses the word justified, he's talking about salvation. This is when someone gets saved. This is where somebody, and I always teach it like, just as if I'd never sinned. Like you're saved, so justified. Justified, those he justified, he also glorified. And just like Paul always uses justified when he's talking about salvation, Paul also always uses glorified when he's talking about heaven. And that's the key. That right there, that word right there, is the key to understanding how we apply this verse. I'll show you what I'm talking about. If you back up even further, you can go 10 verses behind Romans 8:28, and in Romans 8:18, Paul says this, I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us. He's talking about that will be revealed in us. He's talking about heaven. He's talking about glory. And so now we understand. Paul is saying that with a heavenly perspective, you will be able one day to say from heaven that God has been and did work all things together for the good of those that loved him. The story's not over yet. If you ain't dead, God ain't done. That's the idea. If you ain't dead, God ain't done. The story is still, the plot twists are still ahead of us. And at some point, Paul is saying you'll be able to look back and see that God was and is and did work all things together for the good of those that love him. Now, the tough part about that is just simply that heaven's a tough motivator because no one's seen it. No one's like, it's the brass ring that no one has seen. It's just out of our reach. It's just this, we just imagine floating around and wings and things like that. And we just have a hard time. And if God wanted us to be able to have, even an inkling of this kind of perspective from heaven, you'd think that he could show it to us a little more concretely. I mean, I wish somebody could have been there and come back and give us a little bit more clear of picture of what it is. Well, sure enough, there was one. There was John. The Apostle John. The Apostle John was caught up into the heavens and it was sent back and wrote about it. That's what the book of Revelation actually is. And the book of Revelation was a book that was written to Christians, church people, who were they were suffering. They were going through incredible persecution. And this book was written and given to them. And it is meant to encourage us and help us to hold on and have faith because heaven's coming. That day is coming. And I'm like you. I open the book of Revelation and there's dragons and horns and things like that. And I'm like, I'll take Matthew. Thank you very much. I'll just go right back to Matthew. But there are actually some incredible passages of Revelation that just are so clear. They're so encouraging. Revelation 21, it says this, I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, now the dwelling from God is with men, and he will live with them. And when you're going through hard times, like, sometimes it would just be enough for me if I knew God was with me. You know, where it just didn't feel like I'm praying and no one's listening. Sometimes it would, like, you don't even have to explain everything to my God. I just want to know that you're there. And he says, in heaven, the dwelling with God is with men, and he will live with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them, and he will wipe away every tear from their eyes. And there will be no more death or mourning or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. And he who was seated on the throne said, I'm making everything new. And now you can begin to kind of imagine that place. Like imagine no more commercials on TVs with starving kids and bloated stomachs. That's done. Imagine no more anxious waiting rooms. Imagine no more wheelchairs. Imagine no more empty tissue boxes. Imagine no more tables for one. Imagine no more motionless ultrasounds. And no more tear-stained divorce papers. Imagine no more locks on doors. No more passwords. No more weapons and no more war. Imagine a place where we'll just laugh and dance and sing and pray and serve and worship the God who we will be able to call absolutely good, because we can see now perfectly that he actually did work all things together for the good of those that love him. Who needs church anymore? I do. I do. I need the hope of heaven. I need the support of God's people reminding me to hold on and to have faith, because we don't see it perfectly now, but one day we will. And there are days that I want to give up, and there are days that I forget to have that perspective, and I need this place. I don't need an institution. I don't need a religion. But I do need God's people, the church.